Hi everyone, you're welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Amaka. In this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to make this bubu dress you're seeing on the thumbnail. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and also turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified whenever I upload new videos. So let's get started. So these are the fabrics I'll be using for this project. So I have my asoke here, my adire, and I also have this satin here. I wanted to use this asoke, but this asoke will not complement this fabric because it's not a matching color. So I'm thinking of using this satin instead of the asoke. Now take note, if you want to use asoke for your own dress, it's the same way I'm cutting the satin. That's how you're going to cut the asoke. There is no difference. If you cut your asoke the same way, you're going to get the same result. Now I'm using 3 yards of fabric for this project. Now I've already cut this out. I have my front panel and my back panel here, and they are both on fold. Now the measurement I used in cutting this fabric is half of my shoulder measurement plus the sleeve length. Now half of my shoulder measurement is 8 inches. Then the sleeve length is also 8 inches. So from the shoulder measurement, I'm going to take the sleeve length, which is 8 inches. Now I've drawn some lines already. Now the shoulder to waist point is 16 inches and shoulder to hip is 24 inches plus half inch seam allowance, which I'm going to use to join it to the lower part. Now the actual length of this dress is 40 inches. 40 minus 24 gives you 16 inches, which means the lower part is 16 inches. So I'm going to start by taking my neck measurement. Now the back neck width is 3 inches and the back neck depth is 1 inch. So for the front neck depth is 8 inches. So from here I marked 8 inches for the front neck depth. So now on this 8 inches point, I'm going to mark 2 inches. So I'm going to mark these 2 inches down. So I'll mark it to this point, 2 inches, and I'll connect the points. So the front neck width is also 3 inches. So I'm going to mark 3 inches here, 3 inches, and I'll connect this point to this point. So I'm connecting the 3 inches point to the 2 inches point. And I'll connect this point to this point, just like you see me doing. So I'm going to take the shoulder measurement. Now half of the shoulder measurement I'm working with is 8 inches. So I'm going to mark 8 inches here. Now from this 8 inches point, I'm going to mark the sleeve length. The sleeve length is 7.5 inches plus half inch seam allowance. That gives you 8 inches. Now from this point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant and I'll connect it to the neckline. So from here, I'm going to impute the round sleeve measurement. The round sleeve measurement I'm working with is 10 inches. Now this 10 inches will work for a lot of people. You know the sleeve is free. So I'm going to check what I have here. Now what I have here is 16 inches. So I'm going to bring it down here. So I'll mark 16 inches here. And I'll connect it to this point. Now from here, I'm going to go in by 3 inches. So I'm going to mark 3 inches here. So on the hip point, I'm going to take my hip measurement on the hip point. My hip circumference divided by 4 gives you 10 inches plus 2 inches for ease and 1 inch seam allowance. That gives you 13 inches. So I'm going to mark 13 inches on the hip point. And I'll connect the points. Now, if you want to shape your waist or you want the waist to be a little bit snatched, all you need to do is to go in by 1.5 inches from this point, from the waist point, and you connect it from here to here. And for here, because you don't want it to be pointy or too sharp, you just have to curve it, you know. Now from this point, I'm going to go in by 1 inch and I'll connect it to this point. Now, because I want my sleeve to sit nicely, that's the reason for this. Now, I'm not working with this. But But if you want to shape yours or you want yours to be curvy, you can do this. All you need to do is just to mark 1.5 inches and you connect the points. So now I'm going to cut it, but before I do that, I'm going to add my shoulder seam allowance. So my shoulder seam allowance is 1/2 inch. So I'll start by cutting the back. I'll cut the back first before cutting the front panel. So I'm going to remove the back. After removing the back, then I'll work on the front panel. So I've removed the back. Now I'm going to work on the front panel. I'm going to cut off this part. Now you see this mark, this 8 inches neckline. You have to notch it so that you know where your neckline will stop. So the next thing I'm going to do is to take this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to join the front panel and the back panel right side facing right side, and I'll join the shoulders. So I'm going to join the shoulder with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now I placed my fabric right side facing right side. So after joining the shoulders, I'm going to fix the pockets. Now let me show you how to cut the pocket and the belt. So now I'm using the satin for my pockets. Now I've folded my fabric into 2, and I'm going to fold it again into 4 because I need 4 pieces of the pocket. So I'm going to draft my pocket this way. No much thing, there is no much protocol on drafting this pocket. So I'm going to cut it. So from here, I'm going to measure 7 inches from here. So I'm just going to connect it to this point and I'll cut it. So this is the waist point. I'm going to notch the waist point. So now this is what I'm going to do. Now this is the pocket. I'm going to place the pocket this way. So I'm going to place the pocket this way. Now from the waist point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch and I'll place the pocket. Now I'll take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance. After sewing, I'll notch. After notching, I'll push the seam allowance on the pocket and I'll top stitch. Now let me illustrate with pins. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew this fabric and the pocket together with 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now take note, I placed my fabric right side facing right side. The right side of the pocket is facing the right side of the fabric. So after sewing, I'm going to push the seam allowance on the pocket and I'll top stitch. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to sew the pocket the same way I sewed the back panel. So after sewing the pocket, I'm going to put the seam allowance on the pocket and I'll top stitch. Then I'll place the front panel on the back panel right side facing right side, and I'll sew from here with 1 inch seam allowance. I'll sew into the pocket and sew down to the hip point. I'm also going to sew the other side the same way. So now for the belt, this dress has belt. So I'm going to fold the belt this way, right side facing right side, and I'll sew. I'm going to sew it with 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance. After sewing, now I'll sew it from here with 1/2 inch seam allowance down. So this side is going to be open, so I'm going to turn it to the right side from that open part. Now take note, my belt is 5 inches by 34 inches. 5 inches by 34 inches. So after sewing my belt, let me show you how I'm going to attach it to the dress. So after sewing the belt is going to be on top of the pocket. So when I finish sewing my belt, I'm going to have something like this. It will be on my belt, will be on fold. So I'm going to place it from inside, from the right side, and I will sew. So I'm going to sew with 1 inch seam allowance. I'll sew from here like this. I'll sew into the pocket and I'll sew down to the hip point. Now after sewing, you see my belt. My belt is going to be inside on the right side of the fabric. I'm going to do all these things I just said and show you the outcome. Now after sewing, this is what I have. Now you see my belt. This is the right side. See the pocket. The pocket is inside. For the armhole, you have to notch it. You will notch it so that the armhole will be free. So after notching, I'm going to fix the collar. So this is the pocket. You see how the pocket is. So to fix the collar, I'm going to measure what I have here. So I'll measure what I have from here to the neckline. I'll measure it round and I'll measure it down to the hip point again. So what I have here is 58 inches. So instead of cutting a strap of 58 inches, I'm going to make it 62 inches. Now after sewing, whatever excess I have, I'm going to cut it off. It's better to have excess than to have shortage. So the width of my band is 5 inches. Now another thing I'm going to do is to find the midpoint of this neckline and I'll notch it. So the next thing I'm going to do is to measure from here. I'll measure from here to this point, to this 8 inches point that I notched. So what I have here is, now I'm measuring from this point to the midpoint of the neckline to this 8 inches point that I notched, and what I have here is 12 inches. Please take note, before you sew your collar, iron interfacing on your collar. Iron interfacing on your collar. So I'm going to fold my collar into two like this. Now I'm going to measure that 12 inches. Remember that 12 inches mark that I marked from the midpoint to that 8 inches point. Now I'm going to mark it on this collar. So I'm going to mark that 12 inches here. Now from here, from this point, I'm going to measure 12 inches and I will mark. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to find the midpoint of this collar. Now I'm going to mark the midpoint of this collar. I'll mark it straight. I'll mark it down to the end of this collar. So when I take this to my sewing machine, I'm going to sew on this line. That is the midpoint of this collar. I'm going to sew on it. And after sewing, I'll turn it. Now I'll do it and show you the outcome. So after sewing, this is what I have. You might be wondering why I used 5 inches for my collar. Now you remember that the part I cut off from the fabric, the main fabric, is 2 inches on fold. Now if I place this my collar on fold, I'm going to have 2.5 inches on fold, which means 2 inches is for the collar while ½ inch is for seam allowance. So that's why my collar is 5 inches. So now that I've sewn the midpoint, I'm going to turn it like this. Please, if you're using satin, you have to iron interfacing on your satin so that your satin will be firm. But if you're using asoke, there is no need of ironing using interfacing because your asoke is already firm. So after sewing, you have to iron it, give it a thorough press before attaching it to the dress. Now this is how to attach it to the dress. So I'm going to place the midpoint of the collar on the midpoint of the neckline. I'm going to place it right side facing right side and I will sew. I'm going to sew it with ½ inch seam allowance. So I'm going to sew it from here, from the midpoint. I'll sew it down to the hip point. Are you seeing what I'm doing? I'm now holding here. So I'm going to sew it. I'll keep sewing it and I'll sew it to the hip point. I'll sew it down to the hip point. So when I sew it to this point, I'm going to continue from here. I'll sew here and I'll sew here to the hip point again. So after sewing, I'm going to have something like this. So after sewing, I'm going to have something like this. Now I'm going to have something like this. So I'm going to do all these things I just said and show you the outcome. So I've cut out the band for the sleeve. Now my band is 3 inches on fold. 3 inches on fold. You remember that my sleeve length is 7 inches. So plus this 3 inches band will make my sleeve length 10 inches. So my actual sleeve length is 10 inches. So now I'm going to place the midpoint of this band on this shoulder point, and I'll sew it. I'll sew it down to this point, to the armhole, and I'll also sew this other part down to this point, and I'll join it together and turn it to the right side. So I'm also going to do the same thing on this side. So I'll do all these things I just said and show you the outcome. So after sewing, now this is the outcome. Now if you're using asoke, it's still the same thing. The same way I did this one, that's what you're going to do on the asoke. So it's the same thing. There is no difference. The only difference is the fabric. That is the difference. Now this is the lower part that I'm going to gather. Now what I have here, this strap is 3 yards. The length of this strap is 3 yards. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and the first thing I'm going to do is to sew it with gather stitches. After sewing with gather stitches, I'm going to gather it. Then I'm going to place it on the upper part, right side facing right side. I'll sew. I'm going to sew it with 1/2 inch seam allowance. After sewing with 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'll hem the lower part, and that will be it. So I've fixed the belt, I've sewn the pocket, and I've also sewn the band onto the sleeve. So I'm going to do all these things that I just said and show you the outcome. So after sewing, now this is what I have. So I'm going to wear it on my mannequin and show you what it looks like. Now this dress is beautiful. So that's just it with this tutorial. We are going to stop here for now. If you found this tutorial helpful, please click on the like button. Share this video with your friends. Share this video in your sewing groups. Subscribe to my channel if you've not done so. Feel free to ask questions. I'll be in the comment section to answer all your questions. We've come to the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.